In this video, I'm going to give my bar cabinet a much needed makeover. When the house was built, the original owners used this cabinet as a sewing cabinet. The sewing machine was hooked up to the outlet below, and the light above provided plenty of light to be able to see what project they were working on. However, when we moved in, we decided to use it as a bar cabinet, but I ran into an issue almost right away. Initially, the upper part of the cabinet had 4 shelves in it. Each shelf was being reinforced with some very rough looking scraps of plywood that had been cut and screwed into the back and sides of the cabinet. When I went to initially set up the bar cabinet, I ended up removing the pieces of plywood that they had installed to reinforce the shelves. These pieces were preventing me from moving the shelves around and putting them at different heights, and they really stood out because they were a different type of plywood than the cabinet itself, and so they were very noticeable, and again, they were very roughly cut and rough finished, so they looked absolutely horrible in the cabinet. What I didn't realize is that the plywood pieces that were reinforcing the shelves, which I removed, were reinforcing them because the sides of the cabinet were both bowing outwards. So a few days after I got the bar cabinet initially set up, the shelves came crashing down. Now, none of the liquor bottles got broken in the process, amazingly, but a whole set of martini glasses of mine ended up shattering. So after that, I removed all the shelves, and I haven't used them since because the cabinet needs to be reinforced. To start with, I'm going to remove the sides of the cabinet. I need to remove the screws from the 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch material along the top and bottom parts of the cabinet. With the screws removed, I can then get the sides out of the cabinet. It would have been easier and I would have had more clearance if I'd removed the light from overhead first, but then it'd be a lot harder to see in the cabinet, so that's going to be one of the last things I do. So this is one of the primary reasons why I'm doing this project. So every time I open this door, this hinge here makes a sound and makes this beating sound against the piece of wood that I just removed. Now, the reason for that is, and I knew this before taking it off, is that this hinge is unsecured. So should have 2 screws going through here, securing the hinge to the bracket, and we got nothing. Now we got 3 fairly heavy duty hinges here for this door. But if you look at the top one, you might be able to see that it's sagging. Well, the whole thing's sagging because you've got 2 hinges supporting this fairly big door instead of 3. So if I apply pressure to the bottom, I can see that top hinge lifts up. So it's sagging under the weight because we don't have the support from this middle hinge. So hopefully if I fix all of that, then it'll also fix some of my alignment issues with the latch mechanism at the top. So while we're on the subject of what's wrong with this cabinet, I'm gonna go off on a tangent here and kind of complain about some stuff. Now, I'm no cabinetry installation expert, but it's a little annoying when you have fairly expensive cabinets and then it's installed in a way where things are just done with very shoddy craftsmanship, or there's no attention to detail to make sure that you're not just damaging things in the process. So this whole bottom cabinets here where you've got these drawers, I don't know what they used to cut them, but it doesn't look like they used a circular saw of a straight edge because it's a rough cut and it dips especially bad on this one at the back side. And then for installing it, or as part of the installation process, they need, I guess, secured in place. So they screwed in through the top here to fix them in place down here. Well, this one clearly wasn't pre-drilled because it split the wood, and then they didn't even put a screw right here, but they drilled multiple holes and then attempted to hit it and then just gave up. We do have 2 over here, so it's like, okay, well, at least you did the 2 correctly, but why would you not do the job correctly on the opposite side? So it's minor stuff. But if you spend a lot of money as if you're building your house and you're having people come in and you spend all this money in your kitchen and you want it done correctly. So I really didn't want to have to remove these, but I'm going to have to because the only way I can access the hinges in here is to get them out of the way. Same thing for the ones up here, and I need to get to the hinges because I have the same problem basically with this door, is that you can see here how much movement I've got out of it because these hinges are loose. So, in fact, it's so bad when the door shuts that it completely misses the latch mechanism. To remove the sections that the drawers go into, I need to remove 7 screws. 1 screw goes through the bottom into the floor, 4 screws go through the back of it into the wall, and then 2 screws come down through the top into each of its respective sides. help. Okay, now that I've got those pieces out, I'm gonna go on a little bit of a rant here because I'm kind of annoyed. So again, I'm no expert on installing cabinetry, but I'm pretty sure that was not the way to go about it. So one, they've got this big gap at the back of this. It's 1.5 inches deep and it's 6.5 inches wide. And on the left side, which was the first one I took out, they put this tiny little piece of wood back here. They've been attempted to hit it with 4 different screws to try to secure the drawers to the back of it. And they only hit with one solid one at the top. They nicked it with the second one, and then the 2 bottom ones completely missed it entirely. In fact, if they even hit with the bottom one, they were probably very likely to hit the screw that was holding this in place. Now, again, you have 6.5 inches in width at the back where you could put a piece, and you put something that was 2 inches wide, maybe. Have to grab a tape measure and measure it, but it just makes no sense. And then on the opposite side, they didn't put anything, and they only hit with 1 screw. Even though they drilled 4 holes in the thing, there was only 1 screw that was actually like essentially touching and holding into anything. The second one was spinning, and the 2 bottom ones were missing, but there's holes in it for some reason. So, and then to secure it so that it couldn't wobble in the front, since they didn't do a good job securing it in the back, they drilled into the grout of the floor, put a molly in, and then just put a screw into it, which really, again, shouldn't have been necessary had they gotten a secure hold into the back of the cabinet. With the main parts of the cabinet removed, I'm left with only the light and the latch mechanisms up top. Now I'm going to leave the latch mechanisms for now because I still want to make adjustments to the doors after I fix the hinges, and I want to make sure that the doors are still able to latch, so I'll remove those later. As for the light, it obviously works, but it's not what I have in mind for the final look for the bar cabinet, so I'm going to remove it and I'm not going to be reinstalling it. One of the things I'm going to do in this project is to fill in all the holes that were left after removing those pieces of plywood. So I'll just use wood putty and fill them in and then sand it down to make it nice and clean. But I have a better way of helping reinforce the sides of the cabinet so that they don't bow out anymore, and something that still allows me to move the shelves around and adjust them as I want. Reattaching the hinge was easy because I ended up finding the original screws. The first one I found when we moved in and I set it aside. The second one I found when I removed the side of the cabinet. It had fallen behind it, and so it was just loose back there. Making the adjustments on the hinges to get the doors the way I wanted them took some time though. I didn't end up filming it because I ended up spending well over an hour making adjustments, but each hinge is capable of making 3 different adjustments. And so for the big doors, you got 3 hinges per side. That meant you had a total of 9 different adjustments you can make. Next up was to fill all the little holes in the upper part of the cabinet using wood putty. Since wood putty tends to shrink after it dries, this ended up having to happen a couple of times. So in between each application, I would sand it smooth and then add some more wood putty, wait for it to dry, and repeat the process. Now there's 2 holes I didn't end up filling. One in the right hand corner of the base of the cabinet. Since it was nicely cut, I'm gonna assume that it was done when the cabinet was installed, and it was probably used to run the power cord through that powered the sewing machine. The other one is up top, right behind where the latches were. I decided to leave that one because I figured I could use it to run my power through for my new lights, but in the end I didn't end up using it at all. Since adjustments to the hinges were done, I was able to remove the latches, and I removed the piece of wood that they were attached to as well because I want a new one that spans the entire width of the cabinet. With my prep work inside the cabinet done, I was ready to start taping everything off so I could get ready for painting. Now I know some people really hate when people paint wood. I really second guess this decision myself, but please hold all judgment to the very end when you see the final product. I think it came out really well. With the inside of the cabinet now ready for paint, I now need to go prepare the shelves and the sides of the cabinet. First, I need to cut the lengths in 1.5 by 3/4 inch pieces of wood. This will be used in a couple of ways, but the main reason I'm cutting this is to reinforce the side walls of the cabinet that were bowing that caused all of our problems to begin with. I said earlier that the sides of the cabinet were secured to the top and bottom parts using 1/2 inch pieces of wood. That was a mistake. It's actually 3/4 by 3/4, but I'm going to get rid of those and increase those to the 1.5 by 3/4 inch pieces I'm cutting now. One of the issues I have with those is that the screws barely fit. They were right on the edge of that 3/4 by 3/4 inch material, and so by increasing to the 1.5 inch width, I'll have more space to be able to get them dead center in that board, and it will be stronger hopefully overall. Since the sides of the cabinets have holes in them that were put there when they installed the plywood to reinforce the shelves, I need to fill those holes with wood putty so that I can cover them up, and of course I need to sand the sides and all the shelves down so I can prepare them for painting as well. Because the surfaces of the cabinet are so smooth, I'm not going to use normal primer for this, which would have a very hard time sticking to the surface since it's made for a more porous, rougher surface to apply to. So instead, I'm going to use bonding primer. A bonding primer is typically used when you want to paint a very smooth, non-porous surface, such as a countertop or metal. A bonding primer can be bought right next to your normal primer in your paint stores, and they do sell it in anywhere from quart size containers up to 5 gallons. And they actually sell it in spray paints as well. Now, I'm not going to paint the entire cabinet, so all the exterior surfaces of the cabinet are not going to be painted so that they continue to match the rest of the kitchen. I'm not going to paint the interior parts of the doors. If I choose to do that, I can do it at a later point, but as of right now, I've decided not to. And I'm not going to paint any of the areas inside the cabinet when it's fully assembled that are not visible when it's fully assembled, because that would just be a waste of paint and a waste of my time. My choice of color for the bar cabinet is Cowboy Boots by Sherwin-Williams. I've used this color before. If you've watched any of my previous videos, then you might remember I've used this color on my stackable daybed and on the nightstands that I built for my stackable daybed. I also use this color in my downstairs office. I painted the entire room this color minus the 2 closets in the office. As for why I went with Cowboy Boots for the color, well, 1, I already liked the color since I used it on several projects before this. 2, I had more of it on hand, so that was very convenient. And 3, if you go out in town to a bar, most bars tend to be dark colors on the inside and are dimly lit with low lighting, so I wanted that same aesthetic for my bar cabinet. In order to keep the side panels of the cabinet from bowing outwards, I attached 2 pieces of 1.5 by 3/4 inch wood. One piece of wood was attached flush with the edge of the back side of the panel, and then the other piece was attached flush with the edge with the front side of the panel. Since I removed the 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch pieces of wood that were originally used to attach the side panels to the inside of the cabinet, I ended up replacing those with the 1.5 by 3/4 inch pieces. They were secured through the back side of the panel so that those screws weren't visible. With the side panels now assembled, I was ready to put them back into the bar cabinet. Unfortunately, the right side proved to be a bit difficult. It was a very snug fit, and so I was forced to get a rubber mallet out to help beat it into position. Although it wasn't shown on camera, I did use a level and a square to make sure that the side panel was properly aligned before I secured it in place. The left side was much easier to put into place and did not require the use of the mallet. However, since it wasn't a snug fit, I had to be more careful about maintaining its alignment while I secured it in place. Next up, it was time to reinstall the base cabinet drawers. First, I reused the original screw holes in the backs of these cabinets to secure a 2x6 to the back side of them. I didn't even have to cut these 2x6s down to size since I had some scraps from a previous project on hand and they fit perfectly. Next, I pushed the cabinets back into place and then secured them using the screw that goes into the hole in the floor. Again, I don't like that they originally drilled a hole in the tile to be able to do this, but since it's already here, I might as well use it. After making sure the cabinet was square with the back wall, I then drilled several holes down the center of the back of the cabinet. Next, I put 3-inch long screws through the back of the cabinet to secure it to the wall. Since my drawer cabinets were now properly held in place by being secured to the wall and being secured to the floor, I didn't bother putting any screws through the upper part of the cabinet down into the tops of them. I realized after making adjustments to all the cabinet door hinges that the bottom cabinet doors were not going to end up being in proper alignment with their latches. So the only way to fix that was I was going to have to put a spacer in to bring the latch mechanisms down a little bit. After taking some measurements, I realized I could use the thicker side of some door shims to be able to provide the spacer that I needed. While they didn't look perfect after being installed, the doors were now actually capable of latching, and you can't see the shims at all unless you get down on the floor. Next, I needed to attach the new piece of wood that the upper cabinet door latches would attach to. The original piece was only about 6 inches long, and I wanted something that was going to span the width between the two sides of the cabinet. So after I got both sides into place, I measured the distance and then cut a new 1.5 by 3/4 inch piece of wood. Now that the cabinet has been put back together, my next step is to add my new lights. My first step was to drill 2 holes through the top of the cabinet in order to feed the lights through. It would have been a lot easier to ensure that the holes were in the proper location if I had been able to drill from inside the cabinet. But because of the location I wanted the holes at, the drill was simply too large to be able to get the drill bit into the proper location from within the cabinet. Instead, I had to measure and mark on the top side of the cabinet, and then I drilled a pilot hole just to make sure I ended up in the proper location before committing to drilling the proper size hole with the larger drill bit. I almost didn't have enough space to be able to use the drill on the top of the cabinet. The ceiling's only 12 inches above the top of the cabinet, and as you get a bigger drill bit, it also gets longer. The drill bit size I needed for the lights was long enough that even with it fully inserted into the drill, I was only left with less than 1/4 inch of space between the end of the drill and the ceiling. Next, I installed the clips that the metal tracks for the lights will attach to. I installed the clips so they would be 6 inches from the ends of the tracks, and I used the level just to ensure that they would stay square to the sides of the cabinet. Each track was 39.5 inches long, so I was able to fit one full-size one, and the second one had to be cut down to size. With the right side done, I simply repeated the same process on the left. With the tracks in place, I was ready to feed the LED strip lights through the hole. The holes ended up being the exact width of the LED lights, so while the lights were capable of going through them, it was a little snug, so I should have gone one size bigger on the drill bit. Now I needed to fix the wiring situation on top of the cabinet. I have to assume this was all done when the house was built, but to supply power for the original light in the cabinet, they drilled a small hole directly above the cabinet and pulled about 2 feet of Romex out of the wall and then wired it to the light. In order to hide the excess Romex and keep it flat to the cabinet so it wouldn't be seen from down below, they ended up stapling the Romex down to the cabinet. However, several of these staples did not go onto the outside of the Romex, but instead penetrated the sheathing itself. Now, I don't know if this is allowed by electrical code. Technically, this Romex is 8 feet above the ground and basically cannot be touched unless you get on the ladder. However, I don't like it, so I'm going to push most of the Romex back into the wall, and I'm going to cut the drywall and install an electrical box and an outlet. So after measuring and marking out the size hole I needed, I started to cut it using a utility blade. A drywall saw would have been faster, but it does produce more dust, and my wife was cooking in the kitchen at the time, and I really didn't think that we needed the secret ingredient for dinner to be drywall seasoning. After I cut the drywall, I shoved the Romex back through its original hole and then pulled it out through the new one I just cut, then fed it into my old Works electrical box. I then attempted to put the box into the wall and discovered that the hole was slightly too small, so I had to take it back out and expand the hole just a little bit. Once the box fit, I installed the electrical outlet, put on the cover plate, plugged in my lights, and then vacuumed up the mess I made. My last step was to stick the lights down onto the track and then cover them up using the plastic covers.